this pain, this grief that I'm feeling, I intentionally inflicted that on another family. That was what I refer to as a spiritual awakening. But I didn't know what to do with that at that time. That's just, something that I thought. A couple years later, I was able to involve myself in a restorative justice program where I sat down with 3 mothers whose sons were taken by the same crime that I committed, murder. And I heard these women's story, and, we all sobbed together. And they shared their experience with me and the road that they traveled, and I shared mine with them. And I also shared with them in the end that, I told them I've separated myself from these gangs. I have new values and new belief systems today. I'm clean and sober, but the fact remains, I took a mother's child. I committed murder. How can I ever forgive myself? And these 3 women stood up with tears in their eyes, and they gave me a hug, and they said that they forgive me on behalf of that mother. And that experience rocked me to my core.
We got San Fernando Valley's finest, Lonely, man. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, man. And when you see a lot of shows online about guys fresh out, but when we say you're fresh out, we're talking just over a month, right?
Yeah, I still smell like state soap.
Yeah. And you were down for 29 years, bro.
Yeah, 29.
That's insane. That's insane. I mean, it's almost hard to conceptualize that you are now a free man. And you're currently in transitional housing, correct?
Yeah, I'm in it's actually a lifer house in downtown Los Angeles.
Wow. And what's that? Because downtown LA is kind of, an area where all the gangs converge. Is that kind of crazy being a reformed guy now in transitional housing, and you're walking to the neighborhood through different neighborhoods? Has that been crazy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, especially considering my reference point for freedom was when I left at 16. So my mind initially primarily goes to that state right there. But, I have to remember myself, I'm a 45-year-old man right now, and they're not really looking at me. However, we are in the center of about 6 gangs. The house has been there for a while, so they're familiar with the house. They understand what we're about. But, there was a little trepidation in the beginning walking out to the store, but, I found my comfort, and, if something were to arise, the energy and what I'm feeding off today, I'm not any brownie points anymore. I'm a guy that's living a pro-social lifestyle. So,
you mentioned a youngster approached you and said, "You know what neighborhood you're in?"
Yeah, I mean, while they do know what we're about, that doesn't stop them for, giving us reminders every now and then, which I understand and I can respect. I'm part of that tribe. I was there at one time too, so I know how it is.
Right. So when he said, "You guys know where you're at," what was your response?
I absolutely know where I'm at. I'm just heading to the store and I'm on my way back.
So you were respectful. Your energy wasn't combative, and
yeah,
those days are behind you.
Correct. And there's times where we'll get into saying, "Hey, I just got out. I changed my life in there." Next thing you know, we're having about a half-hour conversation, with a couple guys, like sharing our life story, sharing our hope and redemption and change with them. So sometimes it can work to our advantage.
Yeah, man. And I think that's great, because, you're not a dropout by any means. You've just changed your lifestyle, your mentality. And that change, you told me, occurred when you were deep into your bid, right?
Yeah.
And you got word your grandmother had passed.
Yes. I got a visit from my mom, and my grandmother was somebody who visited me almost every other weekend. I wrote to her 3 times a week. She wrote to me constantly. Love of my life, my best friend. And she was supposed to visit me that weekend. And my mom came, and my grandmother was supposed to be there. And I was looking, and my grandmother wasn't there. She wasn't behind her. And I said, "Mom, where's Nan?" And I remember seeing my mom's face. It gave a flinch. And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Nan, she died last night." And I don't remember much. I hit the floor. I hit the floor in that moment. But that was the impetus for my change right there. A few days later, I was thinking the woman that loved me most in life unconditionally, they're having a memorial for her life, and I can't even be there to say goodbye to her.
Wow.
I knew in that moment something had to change.
Your handle is on the streets has been lonely, but how hard were you living up to that name, being in solitary confinement and grieving your grandmother? I mean, was that the loneliest you felt in your life?
Most definitely. In retrospect too, that there's no more fitting name. There's no more fitting emotion. I was in an environment, in a space where there's no showing weakness. There's no sharing what you're going through. I was in that cell alone, and I was dying inside. It was 30 days. I sobbed for about 30 days straight. Like it broke me. That was the worst moment that I wish on nobody. I don't even know how I survived it.
Well, the good news is that your grandmother's life wasn't wasted, because she was the impetus for you to kick off the dope. You were slamming dope in prison.
Yeah, I used heroin for almost 15, 16 years.
And you mentioned to me you wouldn't give a shit if the needle may have had Hep C or not. It was of no consequence to you. Fortunately, you never contracted any long-term disease, but that's how deep that heroin pull is, correct?
Oh, it had me by the throat.
Yeah.
It had me by the throat, and I come from a family tree that has been consumed by heroin. My mother and father struggle with it. For by the grace of God, my mother has 7 years clean today. She's my hero. We're out here in recovery together.
That's great to hear. And, we've had a few fellas on the show that have talked about recovery. More recently, Mohawk Matt said, I asked him, hey, how do you pull off? He says, you don't. You have to hit the worst bottom. You have to do it inside, or have a moment in time, such as your grandma leaving you and you taking inventory of your life and saying, I'm done with this crap, right?
Sure. I mean, that was the moment, but it doesn't end there. It's one day at a time for me. It's every day. I have to wake up and make a conscious effort, to live by spiritual principles, to work my program, to go to my meetings, to talk to my sponsor. If I don't, my recovery gets farther and farther away. See, my first thought as an addict is always to numb pain with drugs, to handle situations with violence. But in recovery, I'm able to get to my second thought a lot faster. It's my second thought is right on the heels of my first thought nowadays, because I'm actively involved and engaged in recovery. If I start letting those things go, my second thought, it starts coming a lot faster. So it's not something that I take lightly.
Right. You mentioned violence, man. You were put away for 27 years, not for singing too loud in church. You committed second-degree murder.
Correct.
And you killed an individual. You took somebody's life, somebody's wind, and you took somebody's son, somebody's brother, lonely. How have you reconciled with that moment internally? Have you come to peace with that moment?
I'm ashamed to say that for a lot of years, I wore that crime as a badge of honor, as a pledge of allegiance to what I was representing. But there came a moment when I shared when my grandmother died, and I remember later on that day thinking, this pain, this grief that I'm feeling, I intentionally inflicted that on another family. That was what I referred to as a spiritual awakening. But I didn't know what to do with that at that time. That's just, something that I thought. A couple years later, I was able to involve myself in a restorative justice program where I sat down with 3 mothers whose sons were taken by the same crime that I committed, murder. And I heard these women's story, and, we all sobbed together. And they shared their experience with me and the road that they traveled, and I shared mine with them. And I also shared with them in the end that, I told them I've separated myself from these gangs. I have new values and new belief systems today. I'm clean and sober, but the fact remains, I took a mother's child I committed murder. How can I ever forgive myself? And these 3 women stood up with tears in their eyes, and they gave me a hug, and they said that they forgive me on behalf of that mother. And that experience rocked me to my core. Once you have that experience, you're not the same person anymore. So the crime that I committed, this is what fuels me every day to do what I do, to be pro-social, put out positivity in the world, and try to make sure that another Brian James out there doesn't commit murder.
You know, besides the guilt of taking another man's win, you mentioned that after the 27-year bid, as you reached your parole date and you were walking out of that prison, you were leaving a lot of homeboys behind that would never see the light of day.
Sure.
You mentioned a term to me called survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Walk us through the feeling of leaving guys behind that became your closest homeboys.
Yeah. These are guys that I grew up with in prison. You know, I came in when I was 18, so some of them brothers, cousins, some of them were father figures. And I've known them, you know, virtually my whole life. And we've experienced things that have bonded us together closer than what a lot of families are. So when I was granted parole, I had to suppress, you know, some of the joy, because I felt guilty, you know, celebrating or showing my joy in front of them. But the hardest part was the day in the morning, they opened my door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they announced my name to go to R&R to be released. And I just remember that last look. I looked up at all the cells, and these are guys serving life without parole, good men who have made the same changes in their life that I have, that deserve to go home. But their opportunity and their time hasn't come yet. And that was difficult. That was hard. You know, I was choking back tears.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been a powerful moment in your life as you left that world to enter this world. And as you stepped into this world, we've talked to guys that have paroled out of prison. The adjustment is so drastic because you're locked in a time capsule, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What have been the most difficult things besides obviously tech? Because I can't even do the tech stuff, and I've been out here my whole life.
Yeah, yeah.
What are some of the splashes in the face of cold water that you feel as you enter society now?
It's referred to as the decompression period. It's hard probably for the average person to understand. Like, you know, I remember the first day, it sounds funny, but everything is done on your own. You stick your hand under a faucet and the water comes. You know, I'm looking for where to turn it on. I remember I was walking up to a door, and I'm thinking as I'm walking up the door, do I push, do I pull? Is this one of them automatic ones? And like, it's a shock, you know? Things move so much faster, the cars, you know, I got a ride here from Matt. I'm looking for the door handle. There's no door handle. You push a damn button now, like.
Right.
Yeah, it's.
Everything's automated. I never thought about that.
Yeah. There was a guy actually in our transition housing. This guy just got here last week. He did 37 years in prison. It's funny, but you know, it's kind of sad. He was walking around the house asking for directions to the App Store.
Oh man. I mean,
yeah.
We chuckle, but it's an honest request if you never heard what an app was.
Yeah.
And you heard there's an app store where you can buy an app.
Yeah.
That's a trip, man.
Yeah.
You don't think about these things as a guy who, or, you know, a person who's never been incarcerated.
Yeah.
For 2 decades, right?
Yeah. And just getting your driver's license, your ID, and people asking, you know, they pull up your name. So where the hell you been? You know, I'm a ghost out here. I went to get my birth certificate down there in LA, and the guy says, we only do newborns. I told him I'm a newborn. I've been alive about 2 weeks at this point, you know. This is as long as I've been out here. So every single experience is brand new. It's exciting, but I love it. You know.
Are you overwhelmed at times right now?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I took the metro train out to the valley, and I walked down to that lower level, and I immediately called my fiancé and like, walk me through this. Where am I at? Like, you know, I'm telling her numbers on the train, and yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, but every experience gives a little more confidence. You know, I feel a little bit more independence.
Right. You ran Southside as a white man in prison. Were you expected to put in more work than the next guy?
Well, when, I arrived there, I put that own pressure on myself. Like, it was never solicited. Nobody ever came up to me and said that specifically to me. This is something that I felt to myself. I knew the situation. I'm on the yard and I'm the only white boy in the car. So I made it a point to overcompensate and to try to do a little bit more than everybody else.
You almost felt like you had to prove yourself. Hey, I'm with you fellas, but I'm also going to put in some work, man, and show you that I'm about this.
Absolutely. I wanted them to know that, heart and soul, I was 100% dedicated to it.
Right. You mentioned you read a lot of books in prison, which a lot of inmates do, but one thing that stood out to me is you talked about Che Guevara. Yeah. You talked about the Cuban Revolution. And I asked you, did you admire Che? Because he was a true revolutionary, right?
Yes.
Stuck two middle fingers out to the world.
Yeah.
What related you to his story?
I mean, I liked him so much that, I got him blasted on the side of my rib cage. But I like the fact that he was so dedicated to his beliefs. He was going to medical school when he gave all that up and packed up and went into the jungles. I identified with him at the time too, because I saw myself like him, a soldier in an army. And I love the fact that while he was in the midst of battle, he always read books and took notes and sought to become more intelligent. He was my role model for many years, still is today, for different reasons, but still very much today.
You mentioned you considered yourself a soldier. What war were you fighting, man?
I mean, what I understand today, the only war I was fighting was going on in between my ears. It was going on inside my head. But at the time, it was, me against the world. We're fighting people in the yard that opposed us. Anybody that didn't meet the expectations or level of respect that I felt that I deserved, that I had coming. Correctional officers, other factions, other cars, anybody.
Right. And you mentioned something interesting to me, that you grew the respect of the homies. They respected you. And the day you felt the highest level of respect is when they asked you for your opinion about a call.
Sure.
Walk us through that moment of feeling that significance.
Well, I had put in a little work at that point. And I was out there, and I don't recall the issue at the time, but I remember they solicited my opinion on an issue that was happening at the time. And this was like medicine for the low self-esteem, the need for acceptance and belonging that I had. That was the greatest feeling that I think I had ever had at that moment. That was the moment that I had worked for. But those are moments that don't last. You have to continue feeding that need for acceptance.
Your whole life you wanted acceptance, you wanted significance. You come from a broken home. You were actually adopted.
I was adopted by my grandparents when I was 9 years old, yes.
Right. Why do you think you have a low self-esteem, Lonely? Where does esteem come from, bro?
Well, I know my low self-esteem came from the fact my mother and father struggled with heroin addiction. So they were unable to care for me, and they were not present in my life. It would be in and out. I didn't understand the nature of addiction. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I had done something wrong, or I was made imperfect, because if your own mother and father don't want you, then something's got to be wrong with you. And I went through the adoption process, and I didn't know any kid at my age in my class that were talking to lawyers, that were talking to social workers, that were talking to judges, just to have a place to live. And this was breaking me down inside. And I can recall that moment. I don't know the context of the conversation of my grandfather. He was talking to a social worker, and he said, Brian doesn't have anybody else in the world. And, it was in that moment that I developed the idea that they're only adopting me because they have to. This is not the reality of it, but this is what I'm telling myself. So I'm living my point at that moment that I'm worthless. Your parents don't want you. Your grandparents are adopting only because they have to. And I nurtured that emotion for many years, which ultimately turned me into a dangerous person.
So when a young man who's living in the hood feels lonely, what does he gravitate to?
You look for love. You look for acceptance. You look for belonging.
Where do you find that?
The gangs, my initial contact with gangs did not come from the neighborhood I lived in. My grandparents lived in a decent neighborhood in Northridge. I saw it on TV, I saw it on movies, and I would hear these phrases of family and for life and forever. So I hit the streets and I sought that out.
And that appealed to you, man, the feeling of belonging.
It met every need that I had as a child at that time.
And you could probably bet a lot of guys gangbanging are looking for that, man. And that's what draws you to that lifestyle. With it comes a huge price, right?
Yeah. I mean, I recently, me and Matt were talking about being trauma bonded.
Say the term again.
The word is trauma bonded. People that come from these homes, it's funny, a lot of my friends growing up, now that we talk about our lives, we realize we lived the same lives. We all had the same pain. We were dealing with the same emotions. We never talked about that at the time, but we met in the streets for a reason because we were all seeking the same thing and we found it in each other.
That's huge, man.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you just put that is just incredible because it almost seems like that's the root of the problem. Everyone wants to do these gang interventions and stuff. Go a step further and let's talk about a young man or woman that's just not loved.
Yeah.
And where they seek that love.
Yeah, I mean, my grandparents, my mom moved me a couple times, but the core issue was never dealt with. So all I did was jump on a bus and go right back to where I came from. You could have put me in Alaska and I would have created a gang right there. I would have used drugs right there because what was going on inside of me, the issue was never addressed. You could take somebody out of their neighborhood, you could take somebody out of their hood, but if you don't address the issue's not getting fixed.
Yeah. And as a young man about to serve 27 years, were you scared when you went to the big house?
I was frightened.
Walk us through those feelings, bro.
I just remember, when the judge had given me the life sentence, I remember, I was in the county jail. I was in the hole at the time. I don't know where I came up with the number, but I told myself I'm going to get out at 36 years old. I went way past that number. But I remember being on the bus going there just to the unknown. All you know is the stories. I was scared. I was nervous.
Yeah.
I had to psych myself up to get into a state of mind and to be ready for that. Because at that point growing up, nothing in my life had prepared me for the life that I was about to live or the things that I was going to confront at that point.
8 years into your bid, roughly, you get stabbed by 3 black inmates.
It was actually 8 months.
8 months.
8 months.
And you were stabbed 27 times?
27 times, yeah.
And you mentioned that had they had bigger pieces, you'd be a dead man.
I absolutely would not be sitting here on Cinemills TV today.
Yeah. When that experience happened, did it make you resent black people, or did you chalk it up as a combatant of war?
Yeah, and there was actually zero resentments. Respect, as funny as that may sound. As I said, I viewed myself as a soldier in a war, and I saw them as soldiers, and they did what they were supposed to do. So much so that I actually went to their disciplinary hearing, and I said, "These are my friends. They didn't do this to me. You guys got the wrong guys," and they got off from that write-up.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't take it personal. I knew the stakes. I knew what was in play.
So you knew the game you were playing.
Absolutely.
And what do you have? What's some of your advice to a youngster that doesn't know the game, man, but thinks he does? What would you tell a young guy right now that's thinking about gangbanging or going the wrong route, hanging out with the wrong kind? What's your advice to them?
My advice is this, and you're going to go to prison. Everybody goes to prison if you're a real gang member. And while you're there, your friends are going to be gone. Your family members are going to die. You're going to get treated like garbage from the correctional officers. You're going to get thrown around the system with no dignity. You're going to live a miserable life. There might be small moments of happiness and joy, but that cloud of incarceration is going to be there. So have fun, because your life's going to be terrible.
So there's no glory, there's no honor?
There's not. Not when your family's driving 500 miles to come see you. Not when your mom's living on constant edge of getting a phone call that you're in the hole, or you've been assaulted, or you've assaulted somebody. And I rarely saw people's friends in the visit rooms. You don't see homeboys in visit rooms. You see parents. You don't see dads really in visit rooms. You see mothers, you see grandmothers, you see children. You don't want your child to grow up in a visit room and become acquainted with vending machines and visiting toys.
Yeah, it's a horrible life, bro.
Yeah, I've seen people, I have friends, I watched their daughters go from a tricycle to a driver's license, in the visiting room.
It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
It's hard to really conceptualize, but the way you survived in there, it wasn't an easy road, because you were from Diablos, which were connected to the Vineland boys, which are right around the corner.
Sure.
And there was a green light at one point on that situation. So you had to walk out of your cell and run fades with just about everybody. Yeah, how exhausting did that get, Lonely?
Yeah, absolutely. This is when I was in the county jail. I had just come from juvenile hall. I had gotten in trouble in juvenile hall, and they sent me to the county jail. And, that was the situation at the time. And every day after breakfast, once a day, I got my clock cleaned. After about a week, they saw that I wasn't going anywhere, that I was going to continue to accept that, because again, I knew it was at play. I knew the stakes, and I was all in on that. I was able to stay there without having that continue.
But you could have rolled it up, man. You could have pressed the easy button. Why didn't you, man?
A lot of people did do that, but the values and what I believed in at the time wouldn't allow me to do that. I wouldn't have been able to look at myself in the mirror if I had done that.
Would you say it's your pride, your ego? What kept you stumped down in there, man?
100% pride and ego.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How have you applied that pride and ego to the change in your life today?
I'm proud of who I am today. I love my life today. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I still do seek that acceptance. I do still seek that belonging. However, I'm not willing to compromise my values and my principles, who I am today, for that. But it's definitely still there.
Lonely, during your prison stay, man, there was a historical moment that changed a lot of the rights for prisoners, and it was called a hunger strike.
Sure.
Walk us through that time in California, detention centers where guys were basically refusing food to get some rights, man, and tell me what they were fighting for.
Yeah, well, for 40 plus years, CDCR had a policy that they called indeterminate shoe sentences, where essentially they would take people who they considered people of influence, and they would put them in the shoe indefinitely. A lot of these guys spent up to 30 years in there without a write-up. They were separated from their families. They were forced to visit behind glass. In Pelican Bay, they're in cells without windows. It's nothing less than torture, what was going on. Finally, in 2013, I started hearing about a hunger strike to end solitary confinement. And there were a lot of organizations on the street that supported it, religious factions, schools. There were a lot of celebrities. And the goal of it was to end solitary confinement, give people an opportunity to get out and take self-help classes and college classes. Because the goal in the SHU was to break spirits. to try to break people of their ideologies. And the only way out was a phrase that CDCR had coined called snitch, parole, or die. So when this hunger strike began, it was made known that this is a peaceful hunger strike. And it lasted approximately 2 months. The section that I was in, none of us grabbed a tray for 46 days.
Holy shit.
Yeah, a lot of people became really, really sick. Unfortunately, some people lost their lives. But this was a monumental moment, and ultimately garnered the attention of the world. 30,000 people participated in this hunger strike.
Wow.
And it went to court, and finally, a panel of judges acknowledged that this is inhumane. You know, the Human Rights Watch acknowledged that this was humane, and they ended solitary confinement.
Thank God, man.
Thank God.
I mean, talk to us about how nuts you go when you're fucking slammed down, man. What I mean, how do you even keep track of time and the days and?
Yeah. Well, there's actually, it's called shoe syndrome, and I recognized it in myself. And you know, I'm somebody that did 9 years back there on my last run. You know, there's guys that did 25, 30 years. So I can imagine the struggles that they face. So the shoe syndrome, the where I recognized it, when I got out, I was walking down the sidewalk and I'm counting cracks in the sidewalk. You count things a lot. I catch myself, you know, counting trees when I'm driving, because you're just accustomed to being in a cell. Your depth perception is thrown off. The first time when I got out, to see something in long distance buildings, to walk straight, you know, my cell, from the back of my cell to the front was 12 steps exactly. And that's when I take a turn. So to have human contact, I went 9 years without any human contact. I had contact one time was when Scott Budnick from the Anti-Recidivism Coalition came. And they're perforated doors. There's holes in them. And he reached up and we touched fingers. It's called a shoe handshake. That was the first human contact that I had had in 9 years.
Wow, man.
Outside of an officer, maybe brushing your hand when he's putting on the handcuffs, because you don't leave the cell without handcuffs. So, you know, that impacts you. And you see it later on in life, like things show up in my life today where it impacts you. But, you know, luckily I'm coping with it and doing quite well.
Do you feel weird when someone gives you a hug, or does human contact feel weird to you? Or
no, I love it.
You
like,
welcome
yeah,
it.
Yeah. I love getting me a hug.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's completely inhumane to lock. I mean, did you feel yourself going insane? Like, did you say, my mind is now fucking going off the rails here?
There were days when I sensed the deterioration happening. You know, I'd be doing stuff in my cell and just going about my day completely absent-minded, and look up and it's dark. Because every day is exactly the same as the other. There's no difference whatsoever. And I've seen a lot of men, good men, lose their mind inside there.
What do you say to the guy who goes, you know what, fuck them, man, they committed these crimes, throw them under the fucking jail cell? What do you say to someone that has that insensitive feeling?
Well, I can understand somebody saying that, you know, especially in my case, the crime I committed, I'm not deserving of anything. So I can understand where they're coming from. My message would only be that change is possible. You know, when you show somebody the light and you give them an opportunity, they can become a different person, a different man, and change their beliefs and turn around and help people in the world. There's people in this world, there's young kids that only I can talk to because I'm from their tribe. I know exactly what they're going through. Whatever they've dealt with in life, you know, sadness, wanting to commit suicide, mental health, I've dealt with all those things. I could tell them, look, I was there with you. I lived that moment just like you have, but look at me now. I made it out. So without us out here, who's gonna talk? Who's gonna help these future?
So this is a call to society for those that think that locking a man in a cage for 9, 10, 15, 20, 30 years is rehabilitative. It's not. It makes more madness in this world.
You're not addressing the issue. If you take a broken person and you just stick them in a box for 20 years and you let them back out, that's going to be a dangerous person.
Lonely, if you were the head of the Bureau of Prisons, how would you take a monster and make them a better man and a contributor to society? What do you think is the right way to imprison our criminals? What's, because I've seen shows on, like in Norway, they let these guys come and go, and they have TVs, but they have to check in. I mean, is there a way to do this even with the most vicious monster?
Make it look like society someday. Like in Norway, they don't live in cells. They call them apartment buildings, and the officers are custodians or something. I seen a 60 Minutes on that one time. But prepare, we're sitting in these cells that, with the gray walls, nothing represents society. So when you come out there, it's a complete shock. And they have to have the opportunity to take groups and discover who they are, why they did what they did, where they developed these beliefs from. And they have to understand that there are people out there that care about them. Because if you think nobody cares about you and you're getting treated like an animal, that's exactly how you're going to respond.
And you're an example of a guy who's been rehabilitated. You saw the light. You didn't see it through the state of California, didn't show you the light. You found the light from within inside you, man.
Exactly.
And you're a reformed guy, and you're conducting yourself a completely different way. But, I look at your arms and your neck and the teardrop, and I see the vestiges of your old life, man. Sure. How important is it how you mentioned the energy you give off, but your dress code has changed a little bit. Are you trying to find like how to dress without looking like a gangbanger? Is that something you've put thought into?
Sure. I mean, last time I was on these streets, I was wearing 54-inch Ben Davis and 3X tops and, Nike Cortez. I got to remember I'm 45 years old now. I'm a different person, and I've been in prison my whole life, allowed to wear nothing but blue and gray. So it's fun to explore colors, and I'm discovering my style daily. I'll buy something and try it out and wear it. So yeah, it's kind of exciting. Getting dressed in the morning is one of the best things of my day, for sure.
Right, and that it's just a trip to think about all the new things that you're discovering. Do you feel like almost like a child again, like you've been rebirthed, reborn?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect description of my life today. Yeah.
A lot of Christians use the term reborn, like I'm a born again, sure. As I found God. And you mentioned a faith component. Are you a Christian? Are you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you found a higher power through Jesus Christ,
yes.
through a pathway to God. And I've never judged anyone for their religion, because you always feel like there's different area codes to get to God. If it's Jesus, Zeus, Buddha, Allah, whoever it is, that's your pathway to God, right?
Yes.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah, whatever, I'm part of the Narcotics Anonymous, and, we say a God of your understanding. Whatever brings you peace, whatever gives you comfort and happiness in your life, I support you in that.
You mentioned that dogs are a huge part of your life, Lonely. Was that the Corcoran prison program that got you into the dogs? Is that what I understood correctly?
Yeah, well, when I had just got out of the SHU following the hunger strikes, I had hit the main line. I was out on the main line for about 6 months when I seen a sign up on the wall that said Positive Change Dog Program. And, this is probably one of the most treacherous level 4s in California at the time. So I'm thinking there's no way there's going to be dogs on this yard. But at the time, I'm open. I'm searching for something different in life. So I signed up my name. And sure enough, 6 months later, the Marley's Mutts program brought in that on the yard, and I became a dog trainer. I worked with rescue dogs, and yeah, it fundamentally changed me as a person.
What a great program, man.
Yeah. It's actually in a few prisons. It needs to be in every prison. When I would share with guys and show pictures about myself in the dog program, they would perk up, and there would be an enthusiasm and an excitement for it, unlike any other group there was. And it changes the whole temperature of a yard. When there's 7 dogs running around a yard, the temperature changes on a yard for sure.
Brings a smile to everyone's face, right?
Yeah, I mean, walking my dog around the yard, I had guys come up. I said, I haven't pet a dog in 30 years. And we'd share a story. They'd tell me about their dog. And these are people who under normal circumstances, we wouldn't be having a conversation.
You know, you hear about programs for vets, man.
Sure.
And my friend, who's a former Navy SEAL, works with dogs and gets dogs to combat vets. But if you think about a combat vet and a level 4 inmate or a shoot guy, man, it's almost the same PTSD thing going on, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
So what better way to introduce dogs as comfort animals, right?
Yeah. And I've seen it. I seen what it did in my own life, and I seen what it did in the lives of the other convicts that were in the dog program with me.
Right.
You know, and just like me, they were gang members, and these dogs, they give us everything that we're seeking for. My dog gave me love, attention, a sense of belonging, taught me work ethic,
loyalty,
unconditional love. And I made the connection was, you know, my grandmother died, and I was still grieving at that point. And this dog is somewhat healed that, because I got unconditional love from this dog. They don't care what your sentence is. They don't care what your crime is. They don't care where you came from. They just look at you. They just look at your soul, and they just want to know what we're doing today. And that's a feeling for me that's unmatched.
And now you're working with dogs. You took that moment, and are you gonna do a grooming thing or more of a training thing for dogs? What's the game plan right now?
Well, because of the program that I was in, and you know, the connections that I was able to make with people in that industry, I got my dream job at LA Canines. So I'm going to be there rehabilitating and training dogs.
What a perfect post-prison profession. It's honorable. It helps people. It accomplishes everything. How can our audience support your cause, man? Can we reach out to you, man? Do you have a Instagram handle, Facebook?
Sure. You can go to Free Bliss on Instagram, and I'm there. Message me.
You interact with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll interact with you. And
thank you.
You know, if you have a dog, share with me. I'll connect you. If you want to adopt a dog, I could connect you with a service.
Thank you. And is this facility in LA, this canine facility, is it a not-for-profit, or is it a for-profit company?
Yeah, it's a business. It's in Venice.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Very
one
cool.
of the top facilities, you know, in California.
Do you think in the near future the Cinemills team can embed with you over there and see the get down and how you work with these dogs and how you train them and stuff? Is that something we could do?
Yeah, that would be amazing. And most of the people working there, I would say actually about 5 of them are all formerly incarcerated.
That's cool. So it's kind of a second chance place. They don't judge you and they work with you, and that's cool, man. And listen, Lonely, we want to thank you, bro, for sharing your story and coming here today, man. And if there's anything Cinemills TV can do to help you, bro, just if it's just basic adjustment to life, anything, bro, we're here for you, man. We want to support you because your cause is righteous, bro. It's about bettering humanity. It's about dealing with your past sins and atoning for those sins. And so we really respect your story, man. Thank you, Lonely.
Yeah, thank you for being so gracious and welcoming and allowing me this opportunity. I'm extremely humbled by it.